authoritarian regimes love elections more than the citizens. Because when these regimes lose popularity, this election announcement is their own resource of legitimacy. So you'll see the regimes from Bashir in Sudan, Mubarak in Egypt, Paul Biya in Cameroon, even this guy of Equatorial Guinea, Obiang, he also organizes elections.
In Zimbabwe.
The time when Mubarak was overthrown, he was overthrown 6 months after the elections, and he had won that election by 96%. So this popularity of 96%, how did the people who loved Mubarak in 6 months, after 6 months they are saying, we don't want you to be president? Wait, how did it happen? So that's so these elections, like you see in 2026, they are for Museveni. They are not for you as a Ugandan.
Welcome to How to Lose an Election, the podcast that breaks down political blunders like a matatu in Nairobi, a boda in Kampala, and a danfo in Lagos. Unpredictable, overcrowded, and occasionally on the wrong side of the road. If you've ever wondered how to turn a promising campaign into a political traffic jam, you are in the right place. From misused tons to reckless overpromising, we dissect the missteps that make elections unforgettable for all the wrong reasons.
Dear viewer, my name is Ochola Odonga Dominic, and welcome to this inaugural episode of How to Lose an Election, a first of its kind podcast here in Uganda. This show is an initiative of the Center for Policy Analysis, and it's an independent think tank and a consortium of like-minded organizations committed to advancing parliamentary democracy, good governance, and sound public policy. Briefly to this background, elections in Uganda have always been more than simple contests for power. They are battlegrounds where history, constitutional maneuvering, and entrenched incumbency collide with citizens' aspirations for change. Since independence, that is in 1962, Uganda's electoral journey has swung between moments of optimism and entrenched dominance, culminating in an environment where outcomes often feel preordained. So, as Uganda approaches the pivotal 2026 general elections, that's next year, understanding why electoral contests repeatedly fail to produce genuine alternation of power has never been more urgent. So each episode that we are going to produce blends historical insights, candid expert analysis, and practical reflections on why electoral competition in Uganda so often ends in predictable defeat for the opposition, and what it would actually take to rewrite that script. Today, I am honored to host our very first guest on this maiden episode, Mr. Godba W. Tumushabe. To briefly introduce him, Mr. Tumushabe is a farmer, social entrepreneur, lawyer, and respected policy analyst. He currently serves as an assistant lecturer at the School of Law, where he teaches international law, international and regional human rights, and environmental law and policy. He is also the associate director at the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies, one of Africa's leading independent public policy research and think tanks based here in Kampala. In addition, Mr. Tumushabe is the chairman and executive director of Tal Eco Farms and chairman of the board of directors at Ruhama Real Estates Limited. In 2018, he was elected a member of Evidence in Governance and Politics. So, Mr. Tumushabe, you are most welcome to this show.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Great pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Today, our conversation will center on the history of elections in Uganda. If I am to give you a brief background to this, because you are not new to this, and you know that Uganda's first true independent elections happened, that was around April in 1962.
Yeah.
Throughout that, up to now, you realize that even in 1964 we had a referendum. Then came the post-1996 scheduled elections were interrupted by political instability. You remember that moment, including Obote's abolition of kingdoms, followed by Idi Amin's coup in 1971. So elections were suspended until 1980. Then the return of political competition, 1980 general elections, UPC won amid, widespread fraud allegations. Then Museveni's NRA launched a guerrilla war, leading to his rise to power. Then we have the Museveni era beginning 1986 to present. And in 1996, first direct presidential vote under the 1995 constitution. Museveni, under the NRM, won with 74% in no-party system, though irregularities were also reported. And then 2001, Museveni re-elected with 69%. Opposition challenger Dr. Kizza Besigye contested the results. Supreme Court dismissed the petition. And basically now today, having looked at briefly the history of elections in Uganda, we want to delve deep and try to understand, to kickstart this show. To start us off, how would you describe the evolution of Uganda's elections from the optimism of 1962 to the entrenched dominance we see today as we look forward to 2026 general elections?
But by the way, Dominic, you said we're looking forward to 2026 elections, and you described it as a pivotal moment. I definitely don't understand what is pivotal about it, given the fact that the trajectory has always been known for a long time now. But just to get this back from the history, that the discussion is actually, we normally tend to narrow it down to elections. But I don't think that there is always enough discussion or debate about why elections. Why is it important that a country or a society organizes elections and people go and vote? So elections, and particularly that vote, that ballot paper, is an expression of citizen sovereignty. In other words, you as a citizen, there are certain things that you do as a citizen that you look around, what makes me a citizen? So things like paying taxes, basically, emphasizes your citizenship. Yeah, things like being able to access institutions of state, whether they are institutions of justice, institutions of governance, institutions of opportunity, basically define you as a citizen. Now, when it comes to power, how you determine how you are organized and how you operate as a country, the ballot becomes your expression of citizen sovereignty. So it's the system that enables you to be able and go and vote, have access to that ballot, be able to cast that ballot, and the ballot is counted, and the result is announced, and the outcome is respected, is what determines your sovereignty as a citizen. So anybody, any institution, any person who undermines that vote is basically undermining your ability, your character, and your power as a citizen. So that's why in some cases, elections can lead to violence. Because by my vote not being respected, you've overthrown that sovereignty of the citizen. So come to independence, 1962, while the British colonial authorities gave us or allowed us to become independent, there are people, the historians know, people like Musazi, people like Milton Obote, and those that lived that time, that fought for this independence. But the only way the Ugandan citizens could again express their sovereignty in that independence in terms of their sovereignty was being able to vote and determine the leaders that lead them. So, in short, for the most of the colonial period, I don't think that you can claim that we are just full citizens because someone came, decided to rule us, even created a company called Imperial British East African Company and gave it a contract to rule Uganda. Yeah. Remember that the first army in Uganda called the King's African Rifle, I think actually the origin it was called African Rifles, was a mercenary army imported by the Iberia Company from South Sudan. And it used it to control Ugandans. So come 1962, that was our time to say we now can go to we can have a plebiscite where all eligible Ugandan voters could then determine how the country is governed. And I think that the important point that Ugandans need to understand is that this was a stillbirth. So, because those of us who follow the history, we know that the UPC-KY alliance immediately became a problem within our politics. The disputes over the lost counties, that's the referendum.
The Bunyoro counties.
The lost counties.
Bugangazi and
those were the last counties, the three of them.
Buyaga and Bugangizi.
Buyaga and Bugangizi. But most importantly, the contestation of the presidency between Museveni and Mutesa that then triggered the deployment of the military to attack the Kabaka's palace. So, in the majority of cases, when we say the military question in Uganda, the question of the military in our politics, actually, the starting point to look at this is how the military is used to solve political disputes as early as 1964. I think that's 1964. Yeah, 1964. Fast forward, that problem has remained. So, in other words, like you've explained earlier, Obote dissolves the kingdom government, establishes a republic. 1971, he's overthrown. The military takes over. From 1970, by the way, I'm just completing a study on the role of the military in Uganda's political transition politics. What is really striking is the fact that Uganda has never had a national army. From the colonial period or from the pre-colonial to the present. In other words, the kingdoms that existed like Buganda and Bunyoro, the armies were owned by the kings. They were not owned by the people, the subjects. During the colonial period, the army was owned by the colonial authorities. It is that army that was passed on to the post-independence government. So the army in the post-independence government in the 60s was not owned by the new government. It was still a colonial army. Once Idi Amin took over, the army is the one that took over. And Idi Amin owned the army. The army worked for Idi Amin. It didn't work for Uganda.
Which is the same case today, anyway.
Absolutely. That's the point actually I'm trying to explain, that in 1979, other than the Tanzania People's Defense Forces, the elements of the Ugandan army, the UNLF, were groups of soldiers or militiamen owned by Museveni, owned by Obote, owned by a few other groups. And by the way, if you look at 1979, again, Museveni and Oito Jok went on a recruitment spree when they realized that the only way you are going to be a key player in the politics of this country is that if you have a personal army, you have a militia that you can control. So I think the facts are right now that by 1980, when we had the elections, Museveni had recruited an estimated 24,000 soldiers. Oito Jok had recruited an estimated 36,000 soldiers. So after the elections, Oito Jok soldiers became the UNRF, the UNRA, that's Uganda National Liberation Army. Museveni soldiers became the NRA. And these guys fought it over. You realize that in 1984, when Oito Jok was killed in a plane crash, in a helicopter crash, Obote could not control the army. And he ultimately lost power.
He lost power, indeed, yeah.
So UNRA disappears. Museveni with his NRA comes into power. So NRA is Museveni's army. I mean, they try the narratives of this is a people's army, but who recruited the army? That this is a people's army. Who recruited it? Who was promoting? Whatever. There are no rules, there are no laws that is governing the army. And even I should also mention that because this is important when we look at the elections. So in 1996, that's when Uganda tried to create a national army. By putting provisions in the constitution. And the Uganda Constitutional Commission under Justice Benjamin Odochi was so elaborate on what the people of Uganda said the army should look like and how it should be constituted. But in principle, other than baptizing the UNRA and giving it a new name called UPDF, nothing changed. So it remained NRA. In character, in composition, in its leadership. And I can add and say from 2000, actually around 2000, when there were attempts to implement the provisions of the Constitution, again you can see the failure at the transitioning the army from a militia group called NRA or a rebel group called NRA into the Uganda People's Defense Forces. You can see it. It even fails in 2005 when the UPDF Act was enacted. It failed because the law still had to refer to the original high command as it existed on January 26, 1986. That is still in the current law, even the one that has just been enacted. The original command is still there. So this is their army. Anybody who tries, this thing of like national army, whatever, there are a few things that have been tinkered with on the sideline. But structurally, the UPDF remains Museveni's army. Now, let me hasten to add that the UPDF today is comprised of very, very highly trained professional people who actually are very clear on the character, on their mission as this. We serve a national army. The difference is that for a person like Museveni, for him, he sees his army NRA. That's why you see him increasing from around 2010. He increasingly refers more to NRA than to UPDF. By the way, I should also add that in a civilized society, a government that is governed under the rule of law, if you are the president and you refer to UPDF as NRA, that is your main way of losing power. Because that's an abuse. It's a gross abuse of the constitution. But the fact that the military is still in charge and it is in charge of the elections, that's why you are able to flagrantly abuse the constitution, and it's like nothing has happened. So
Absolutely.
I think in brief, let me put it that way.
Thank you so much for giving us that historical context, looking at probably now 6 decades ago,
exactly.
how Uganda has been moving until today. As the country again prepares for another crucial, election period, you have talked of the interference of the military in the governance of the country. But I would love to, pose this particular question to you. Probably we can get an exact answer to it as well. Like what we have seen over the years, it has become so clear that elections in Uganda have become such high stakes, okay? And often predictable, because even when you looked at the dailies recently, they kept on, giving us abstracts that, 2026, how it would be. Now, why do you think elections in Uganda have become such high stakes? Often, predictable exercises instead of genuine contests.
I think, first of all, we have to understand that elections everywhere are actually high stakes. I wouldn't really say this is only a Ugandan phenomenon. Elections are high stakes because elections are supposed to define how you access power. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In real terms, accessing power means that you have access to state resources. So in other words, you are able to control and determine the mode of appropriation of state resources. Mm-hmm. And here state resources, I'm talking about the power itself, authority, money, positions of appointment, then natural resources. Natural resources is central. Yeah, I'm the one who determines whether you can get a piece of land or not. I'm the one who can determine whether you can get a license to go and do timber harvesting. I'm the one who can determine whether you can get a concession in a national park or whether you can get a license to do mining. These are resources. So that's why elections are high stakes. But civilization means that you create the rules that make that competition fair and credible. So in other words, you trust that the system can enable a more organized and respected system of contestation. I think that's so many times we've had people basically complain or blame elections as a problem. The others even go even worse and blame democracy. I say they say democracy is a problem. What do you mean democracy is a problem?
Yes.
It is the people who are a problem. We've seen the violence that characterizes our elections here in this country, and I've argued time and again that another president who is not Museveni can still use the exact legal framework that we have and organize a credible, free and fair election. I strongly believe that.
Okay.
In fact, another point is that an election where Museveni is not a candidate would be organized differently, whether you like it or not. As long as Museveni is a candidate, the outcome is predictable. Why? Museveni has spent a lot of time reconfiguring the institutions of state to be able to support his life presidency. Because Museveni, I think Ugandans sometimes they don't believe it, but my own analysis of Museveni is that his mental programming is that he's a life president. Yeah, that is his mental programming. So in other words, he can only leave power if something happens, maybe an act of nature or he's overthrown.
Which is unlikely.
No, you can't say it's unlikely. We've seen,
in Congo?
Dominic, man, I keep on telling people, nobody knew that Bashir would would be overthrown at the time when he did. He was overthrown. I don't think that Bashir had less military and less military might than Museveni have. So as far as I'm concerned, the thing of unlikely is really neither here nor there. You can wake up today, you can sleep tonight, and you wake up tomorrow and Museveni is not president, because that's what history has showed us. Yeah. But bottom line is, and where I think that your question is valid, is our elections have not only become a problem. It's not just like health contestation. Our elections is a civil war. It's Uganda's elections is a different definition of a civil war. Yeah, because the level of violence, the level of disregard of human dignity and human rights, you can only equate it to a civil war. I mean, why do you have to organize an election where people are kidnapped, where people are tortured, where people are killed, and then you all flex muscles like you are serious people? For me, that's what really bothers me.
That's exactly where we are going to start from. Immediately we get back to the second half of this show. But dear viewer, this podcast will air on YouTube, SEPA channel, and all other major streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcast and Google Podcast. Tune in to our inaugural episode once again with Godba Tumushabe, as we trace along the contested road of Uganda's elections and ask the question, if you were determined to lose an election in Uganda, what would you do?
You are listening to How to Lose an Election, the show where we take the backroads of political failure, dodging promises like potholes and speeding past scandals like a border weaving through jam. Stay with us as we break down the chaos.
Welcome back, dear viewer, and welcome back to this inaugural episode of the podcast, How to Lose an Election in Uganda. Basically, in the studio, our first guest for this show has been Mr. Godba Tumushabe. He's a distinguished farmer and social entrepreneur, lawyer, and respected policy analyst here in Uganda. Now, we need to continue, especially by examining the patterns of opposition failure in Uganda, Mr. Godba. Based on your research and experience, what are the top, factors that you consider as mistakes opposition candidates consistently make that almost guarantee they will fail or lose an election?
I think that's based on the assumption that they actually make mistakes.
Okay, if any, or if you can cite some.
Let me put it this way, Dominica. This country has narratives that make reasoning and defining the nature of our problems problematic. So, a narrative like opposition, what does that mean? Because that narrative always presupposes that we are talking about opposition political parties, and then we call it opposition. I always try to draw the distinction between opposition and opposition political parties. Opposition political parties is a clearly defined segment of our society. Because you see, as I talked earlier about that citizen sovereignty expressed through the ballot, the citizens to engage in the governance of your country, citizens are organized in what we call citizens formations. For you to give value to your vote, it is important that you are organized in different formations to be able to advocate for your interests. That those formations or those citizens groups, they have interests. So citizens who aggregate political interests organize in form of political parties. So it is wrong to say opposition and then you are referring to opposition political parties because that's very, very narrow. These are groups of people who aggregate their political interests. They are other citizens' formations. Those of us who are pursuing economic interests, we aggregate in form of citizens' economic formations. So you'll find circles, you'll find investment clubs, you'll find cooperative societies and other formations because we have economic interests. So if you have a government, whether it's a Museveni government or a Dominica government that is running a country on wrong economic policy, that is perpetuating economic injustice, these formations that are built on economic interests, they can be opposing you. So they are also opposition. Citizens are organized in professional formations. So the teachers, the health workers, the lawyers, the engineers, the architects, these are citizens' formations built around protecting professional interests. So trade unions. So if you have a government that is undermining workers and paying workers poorly, the way we are seeing now protests going on with arts teachers, that's opposition. Because we are opposed to the policies of the existing administration. Now, I can go on and on and on. So the narrative in this country that opposition and then everybody thinks about political parties, I think is a wrong narrative and it's misleading. I am opposed to the Museveni administration, not because I belong to any political party, but because I'm a citizen of Uganda. I don't like the injustice that go on. I don't like, any government that subjects our people to violence. I am going to be opposing it, whether that government is a Museveni one or a Dominica one or whatever. There's no way that we as a people, as citizens, can sit back and see another citizens being treated unjustly. A citizen is abducted, the way it happened with this gentleman, Eddie Mutwe. Abducted by none other than the Chief of Defense Forces, and you are bragging about it, and then we say, oh, that one is a noob person. Excuse me. That shows you the level of immaturity that we have as a people, but more so in our current circumstances, the amount of fear that the regime has ingrained in our mindset, that a citizen can be that mistreated, and we are not capable of responding and say no, because that should not happen to a citizen, whether that citizen is a Museveni supporter, a Kyagulanyi supporter, a Muntu supporter. He is a citizen of Uganda, and he's us. That citizen is us.
Just like what is happening in Kenya.
Yeah, exactly.
Recently.
That's what's happening.
But why do we lack this cohesive voice as Ugandans?
So let me explain a little bit in my way of understanding, because I can't say that I have the solutions or answers to the problem, but I can tell you that. So in Kenya has a different history than Uganda. So Kenya got independent. They haven't had the kind of violent, other than the Mau Mau rebellion. They fought for their independence, which was important. But I think right from Kenyatta to Moi, they didn't have the kind of violence that Ugandans have been subjected to. In fact, even their constitution, I was privileged to be in Kenya during their fight against President Moi. Because Moi had built an authoritarian regime like the one that we have here. Probably, I think the one of Museveni now has surpassed the one of Kenya, by the way. So I I saw in Kenya, so the one thing that didn't change in Kenya, that Moi didn't change, is that he did not appropriate the military to make it a personal military or an army of KANU. So Kenya Defense Forces remained the national army.
Irrespective of who
of who was president, whether it's Kenyatta, whether it is Moi. The KANU government under Moi did not dismantle the public service. The public service remained the public service of Kenya. In fact, in Kenya, even today, you can have a government, you can have no government for the next 6 months. Government will run no matter, because it has happened before. So the public service is the core of the state of any serious government. The Moi did not dismantle the police force and make it a regime protection force. Even the violence that was being perpetuated was perpetuated by a small unit called General Service Unit, GSU. Yeah? But the police, it was inherently corrupt, but it remained intact. Now, you're saying, so what has happened to Uganda? So what has happened to Uganda is that from the time Museveni took over power, you have to really give it to him, because he knew he wanted to be a life president. He has invested all his time in dismantling the institutions of state. Those that he cannot dismantle, he has appropriated them. So remember that he came with his army, and it is still his army, and it is loyal to him, and it does the things that he wants. He has invested in dismantling the Uganda police and make it a paramilitary force.
That's what we see with the appointment of IGPs sometimes.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, he has appointed the soldiers in the army. There is a time when he appointed even the management of the police, where the human resource manager is an army officer. Basically, that you are reconfiguring the police. He has basically literally dismantled the public service. Public service is a very, very strong institution. Normally it takes much longer for you to dismantle it. But when you see the trajectory, it is again about the same trajectory. But more importantly, that he has used money and violence to perpetuate himself in power. This other thing of the popular will, that one disappeared a long time ago. Today, if he wants Dominica, he'll give you money. That's why he buys all these opposition people. He distributes money around like
others even visit him in the night.
Others visit him during the night. And he's very open about it, by the way. He's very open about it. So you have to give it to him that he knows that he wants to retain power, and the centers of, these institutions of citizenship that I described are supposed to be alternative power centers. So political parties are supposed to be alternative power centers. Professional bodies, because in Kenya, they fight against Moi. After Moi had crushed the opposition political parties the way Museveni has done in Uganda, the centers, the power centers, Moi was fought by a coalition of the Kenya Law Society, the Kenya Commission of Jurists, the Anglican Church, and the students at the University of Nairobi. That was the coalition that led the fight against Moi. So when you saw, not so long ago, I don't remember the year, when you saw Museveni deploy the military at Makerere to violently disrupt students' activity there, that was not an accident, because he knows that students can be a strong center of power. So you have to demobilize all these centers of power for you to remain the only person with power. So when you say, but how come Edmutwe was brutalized and kidnapped and tortured and Mohozi is there announcing that I am holding him, and Ugandans are like, meek? No. You are talking about a population that has been subjected to extreme levels of violence from 1962 to date.
So everyone is protecting their personal spaces.
Yeah, you are looking for where to survive. You're looking for where to survive. The bad news for the regime is that we've seen across the world, history has showed that a people, there is a certain level of injustice and oppression they can take. Finally, they just say enough is enough.
The threshold.
The threshold, you can reach a threshold and you see Ugandans and you say, where have this been in? And I'm worried that we are moving towards that threshold, especially with these young people that do not know the history of Museveni and his fighting group, because Museveni wants us to be perpetually indebted to him that he liberated us. But this country has had many liberations. The UNRA liberated us from Idi Amin. Then he says NRA liberated us from Obote. So that means that for us now as a people, because we should not have another fight, another war, Ugandans must understand that collectively we can liberate ourselves from the violence of NRM.
Taking a recent write-up from retired General David Tinyefuza, he says the people who go on the streets are not the Mr. Tumushabes, okay? Because you understand the history of this country. Basically, the youth. And the youth are the ones who are complaining still that, you know what, government is full of old people, yet they are the majority voters in this country. So with 2026 approaching, do you think the youth can change the game? The youth demographics can change the game in this country?
They can change it in 2026. They can also change it today. So, in other words, me, if I am working, the things that I do that I think need to change this country and make it better, I never use the elections as
a game changer.
As a game changer. No, for me, because you see, the architecture that we are running is Museveni's architecture. It's not ours. Because Museveni basically overthrew the 1995 constitution. He overthrew it. Or the consensus, however imperfect it was, of 1996 was our best opportunity to move into the future with purpose, with confidence, and with respect for one another. Now the challenge, and you know, I can still relate this to Kenya, that the Kenyan constitution of 2020 was fought for by the Kenyans. That coalition that I told you about, it was negotiated by Kenyans. In our case, part of the problem is that Museveni organized his people. They looked for guns, went and fought a war. They declared victory, declared themselves the rulers, and they said, we are giving you a constitution. After he signed on it, we thought that we had won. We all went back and slept. The man started rewriting the constitution until you cannot recognize it anymore. For Kenyans, they negotiated their constitution. They congratulated themselves, and since 2010, they have been laser focused on protecting that constitution. These power holders, they all tried a couple of things here and there, and they have been stuck. They have been stuck because the Kenyans keep on saying no. The members of parliament try this, the Kenyans say we are coming. The president tries this, the Kenyans go to court, and the court says no, that's not what was agreed. Now here, Museveni has basically demobilized the parliament. It's now a useless rubber stamp. He has reconfigured the judiciary with cadre judges. I can tell you, because me, I'm a lawyer. And I don't do legal practice because I cannot afford to practice in Uganda. But when I sit with my lawyer colleagues and they tell you stories of how they even negotiate judgments, and you really feel like, man, God, what did we do? What did we do to deserve this? You can't have a beautiful country as Uganda with very humble, hardworking, honest people.
But honestly,
and then you really you basically create a country that we have created out
on
of
that
it.
note, Mr. Tumishabe, looking at the institutions that are probably under state capture, parliament, the judiciary.
No,
actually,
sorry, Dominic, I want to correct you there. The institutions are not under state capture. They are under regime capture.
Okay.
The NRM regime has captured and appropriated these institutions to work for it.
Yes, because looking at parliament, which is supposed to be supreme, I understand you have seen this happen so many times. Actually, it's the president that can invite parliament away from its home to meet him at State House. Rather than parliament inviting the head of state to come to parliament to explain himself. So to what extent do you think the judiciary or the courts have undermined credibility of elections in this country? Looking at cases that have been presented before them, the predominant, you remember the Kizza Besigye case when he lost the election. He petitioned the court that he did not lose, but he was deprived of his victory. So when you are saying you have actually failed to practice your law, the law that you studied, because it is difficult to practice in Uganda, to what extent do you think the courts have undermined these countries?
Again, the judiciary, I know many of the people in there. Some of them are my former students, very, very smart people who would want to do a very good job. But the judiciary, like any other institution, is a victim of this regime capture. So, in other words, let me tell you that each of these institutions need us, the citizens, to liberate them from their current capture. We cannot rely on them to serve us in the current configuration of power, because they are more of victims than us. I can tell you that even the UPDF, the study I have done, you can clearly see that even the UPDF is a victim of this reconfiguration of power. So these soldiers you see, because when you meet many of them, these are senior officers, they tell you how things are bad. They tell you how they cannot even whisper because they don't know how the system will respond. So you realize, actually, even them, they need us, the citizens, to liberate them. Because if you are a senior army officer, you want that, you want to operate in an environment where you are able to give your best to your country, where your work is recognized. But now we have to be complaining. This other soldier has beaten this one. I mean, you heard what happened in Rwemiyaga between Sechikubo and Rwashande. You ask, who is this Rwashande man that he can go and he is able to get soldiers, deploy them, they disrupt legitimate civic activity, end up killing people. I was so heartbroken when I heard that one of the I think the WBS journalists who was at that event and reported apparently has died in very unclear circumstances. And then the president is quiet, the Minister of Internal Affairs is quiet, the IGP is confused, he can't say anything. I mean, how are we supposed to be living in a country like this? For me, the defining moment was the death of this gentleman called Zebra Mando in Kawempe last elections in January, who was executed by the Special Forces Command people. And the president came on TV and said and apologized to Ugandans and said, it was my security team that killed Zebra Mando. We are going to investigate and I will come back and report. And then he went missing. He has never come back. And it's like, and Ugandans, we have moved on. There must be a point where Ugandans are able to say, no, we can't be violated and brutalized and in this way. And then, the most striking thing is where these people keep on, they crap for Museveni. He says this, he abuses them. he abuses. I've been telling some of my audiences that I find the people who say they are NRM, I find them special. Because they will go on NRM, Museveni abuses them, and then they are clapping, they are laughing, and I'm like, okay, are we really subhuman or what? In other societies, a president must respect the citizens. We are not doing comedy. If you want to be comedy, you retire and you go you turn into a comedy. So the challenge, we have a challenge.
Absolutely.
The elections are just Museveni's timetable. They are not our timetable because it works for them. Because let me end by saying that authoritarian regimes love elections more than the citizens. Because when these regimes lose popularity, this election announcement is their own resource of legitimacy. So you'll see the regimes from Bashir in Sudan, Mubarak in Egypt, Paul Biya in Cameroon, even this guy of Equatorial Guinea, Obiang, he also organizes elections.
In Zimbabwe.
The time when Mubarak was overthrown, he was overthrown 6 months after the elections, and he had won that election by 96%. So this popularity of 96%, how did the people who loved Mubarak in 6 months, after 6 months they are saying, we don't want you to be president. Wait, how did it happen? So that's so these elections, like you see in 2026, they are for Museveni. They are not for you as a Ugandan, because you can't have an election where people are just dying and the violence is that much, and then you are there, you say we are voting. That's
actually
not how it
on that
happens.
note, I needed you to conclude. Is it possible to win an election in Uganda without aligning with parts of the security establishment or the NRM as the ruling party?
It depends on which level. Yeah, so if it's the presidential, as I've said, as long as Museveni is contesting, he has to be announced winner. Whether he has won or not is immaterial. He would have to be announced winner because the institutions of state have been configured to make sure that that announcement is secured and his winning is confirmed. If you are an MP, if you're contesting to be an MP, you've seen, that's why they run, or most of these guys, they run to say we are NRM. You have to align yourself with NRM because NRM is not a political party. NRM is a configuration of state agencies that have been captured. Yeah, so if you are an MP, if you are contesting in Gulu or somewhere, even in Western Uganda there where they say NRM is popular, you need the support of the police, of the district intelligence team. You need the support of the RDCs who are paid by Ugandans for you to be able to have a shot. Even, by the way, even the guys who are contesting on the NRM ticket, they compete on who pays the RDCs how much, or the district police commander,
to disrupt the process.
Yes, they compete because you have to pay some people, including the person responsible for the Electoral Commission. So if you are contesting in those places and you are contesting on the opposition ticket, you are trying to protect your votes from being stolen by the NRM as a declared political group, by the Uganda police, by the internal security, and then by the Electoral Commission. The last thief of election is the Electoral Commission. Because you saw it in Kayunga here when they had elections for LC5. And clearly the guy of NUP had won. And this guy of the Electoral Commission puts a cap on his face and announces the NRM as the winner. So
meaning they were even,
So the Electoral Commission is your biggest opponent in any election. That's why I say we don't have an Electoral Commission. Those guys, they posture. Biaba Kama and his group, they posture that they are an Electoral Commission. The elections here is a military operation. It is the army that knows how the elections are run and how they can determine the outcome. The problem is that sometimes Ugandans were so modest, we don't want to talk about these things in their black and white. So we try to explain things and speak a lot of English. But who would tell you that you as Dominica now you can form a political party and then you go and contest and then Biaba come announces you as a winner? How?
Impossible.
It's impossible. That's the reality of our situation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Godba Tumushabe, for
My
joining
pleasure.
us in this show.
My pleasure.
Dear viewer, we have come to the end of this episode of the podcast here at SEPA. We are grateful that you were able to participate. In case you have any feedback that you'd like to share with us, feel free to visit our YouTube channels and other mainstreaming platforms and share your ideas that you could be having. Otherwise, I've been having here Mr. Godba Tumushabe as our inaugural guest for this episode of the podcast, How to Lose in an Election. Until next time, thank you so much for watching. My name is Ochola Odonga Dominic.
Thanks for listening to How to Lose an Election. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with that friend who thinks politics is just about slogans and handshakes. Until next time, remember, political survival is like a border ride, full of bumps, tight corners, and the occasional broken promise. You can listen to the latest episode on YouTube and all other podcast streaming platforms.